And the webinar is now live. I'll be checking the questions and the chat while you guys are talking and see if we can inject some of that stuff. So we are live from a variety of locations here.
Hello.
Hello, everybody. Let's just give everybody a minute to come in. They're streaming into the webinar. Jeff, where are you? Are you at the lab at the winery?
I'm in the lab.
In the lab, like a winemaker.
Can you see all my beautiful stereo equipment behind me?
I can't quite make it out, but you're right. These are probably the only two wineries in America that have exquisite hi-fi in the winery. Probably only Nicolas-Jay and Robert Sinskey Vineyards would be the only two.
You can't see it, but I have this beautiful reel-to-reel Pioneer that I got. And so I'm revisiting reel-to-reel now.
Wow. What do you have on reel-to-reel is the question. I mean, music-wise. I mean, you got to go back. I had an old Tannberg reel-to-reel back in the day.
How about this one? Someone saw that I had this and they brought this for me. Can you see that?
Is that the Who?
It's the Beatles, Hey Jude.
Oh, the Beatles, Hey Jude. I can't really make it out. Wow, that's fantastic. On real.
And I have a little Crosby, Stills, and Nash.
There you go. There you go.
So
showing the age of our musical art. All right, people.
All donations accepted.
I'm sorry? All right.
Said all donations accepted.
We still got some more. It looks like we're set to go. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Jay with Nicolas-Jay, Jay Boberg. You have it, depending on how your screen is lined up, you've got Jean-Nicolas Mayo from Mayo Camazet and Nicolas-Jay, at least on mine on the upper left. We have Robert Sinskey from the Robert Sinskey Vineyard there on the bottom, and Jeff Vernig, the winemaker at Robert Sinskey. Welcome to all of you. This is a particularly special virtual tasting for me. I have, believe it or not, first and foremost, I have 3 friends surrounding me. All of these relationships, all 3 of them started out as friends long before at least I was in the wine wine producing side of it. Rob and Jeff and I go back to 1993? Three-ish. And Jean-Nicolas and I, of course, go back to 1987. So it's showing our age here as we are. Today, we're very fortunate to drink a variety of very lovely Pinot Noirs. And I know a number of you had ordered these wines and have them at home and are hopefully have them open. There's really only one rule about this virtual tasting, and that is that there are not a lot of rules. And the rule that you hopefully are going to follow is that to drink the wines. And we will talk about the wines. We've talked about somewhat of an order, but there is certainly no structure to that for you. So you should be drinking these wines, tasting through them, seeing how they develop as they're open in the glass and so forth as you go along. Don't worry about it. There's no structure there. We have a group that has signed up for this that comes from across both communities, the Robert Sinskey community and the Nicolas-Jay community, which is actually one of the most wonderful thing about doing these joint tastings. And so consequently, some of you know a lot about Robert Sinskey and maybe not too much about Nicolas-Jay and vice versa. And so I thought we would start out by doing just a little bit of a rundown on the history of the wineries and how we got here. And Rob, do you want to start out with that?
Sure, I'll take it from here. Yeah, we started off as growers. My father wanted to grow Pinot Noir at a time when people didn't even know how to pronounce Pinot Noir. It was, I think they call it Pinot Noir in those days. And he started with a little 15-acre parcel in the Carneros region and met the folks at Acacia Winery down the street, became a limited partner in Acacia in order to create a Sinskey Vineyard designated Acacia wine. And in '85, Acacia ran into some financial issues, sold to the Shalom Group, and we went off on our own and ended up with a piece of land in the Stags Leap District, and started making wine. I got a call to help him set up the winery in '86. Spent a couple of years up here. I was supposed to spend 6 months here, and 6 months evolved into 35 years. Jeff became our cellar master in '87, and we just both stumbled our way through the whole process. We started off with the idea that wine is not an athletic event. We believe that that wine is part of the culinary experience, part of the agrarian experience, and as such, we didn't believe in creating athletic style wines. We wanted wines that would evolve slowly, be classic wines, and as a result, over the first couple of decades, our primary customers were chefs. We tended to sell our wines to chef-owned restaurants, and grew slowly with our vineyards. We now farm about 200 acres of vineyard. Everything is CCO certified organic. We've been farming with biodynamic principles since '91, and it just keeps on going.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, 6 months turned into 35 years. That's
yep. Yeah, well, I figured that my prior career, I was an art school flunky, and so I could be a starving artist, or I could have an expense accountant in the best restaurants in the country. So it was a little seductive.
Well, you did have a day when you were a photographer in Los Angeles, if I'm not mistaken. I think our paths may have crossed before we actually even knew each other.
I actually think I sat down in your office and showed you photographs of Oingo Boingo.
Was that it?
Yeah, I did the photographs of the first album for Oingo Boingo.
There you go. That was it. That was it.
Yeah.
Well, and here we are in the wine world. Jeff, anything you want to add to that historical review, since you have been the sole driver of the winemaking there at Sinskey for all these decades?
Well, I've sort of grown up with Sinskey, of course. This will be my 34th vintage year. I was at Joseph Phelps prior to that, and my Icomas vineyards prior to that. So 1984 was my first vintage in the valley, and I haven't missed a vintage in this valley since then. It's pretty awesome today that we're getting together to taste the Pinots, because so much is involved in the production and making of Pinot. And if you're not making it, you're certainly thinking about it, aren't you? And or drinking it. So it's been great working with the Sinskeys, because they saw the value in all the efforts that we've been doing to improve the fields and planting and thinking about what it is, using the term wine growing. That's been truly rewarding for me, and getting away from the toxic rescue chemistry that sometimes happens with larger scale farming. So I just feel honored to be able to pursue my hobby as a passion and a vocation, and to hang out with great people like all of us today. This is work.
Right, exactly. It is lovely when your passion turns out to be when your avocation becomes your vocation, and you're actually managed to make it work. It is a lovely thing. Well, thank you for that. And it's also great, having drank your wines and known you guys for so long. One of the things that made this such an easy pairing of the two of us, the two wineries together, is that this kind of constant striving for excellence and whatever it takes to try to make the best representation of the vineyards that you're growing, and also the fact that the purity that you speak of, and the attention to detail in terms of sustainability and responsibility as it relates to the land and the process, are things that we certainly all share. So it's great. Jean-Nicolas, would you like to talk about Nicolas-Jay, the oldest?
Sure. Sure. This is a family domain I took over in 1989, and this was a domain at the time that was in my family, but we sold largely in bulk, and didn't have a direct control of our vineyards. And at some point, having such a domain was certainly very nice, but what do you do? And it's being absentee owners like this was not sustainable. So I jumped in. Long story made very short. I jumped in. Never regretted it since. As Jay mentioned earlier, I managed to study in America for a few months, a year and a half actually, in Philadelphia. This is where I met his sister, and where we met back in 1987. We've been friends since, and Jay was coming over to Burgundy for some time, and I was also visiting him in LA. So we've remained in touch and in contact, and we took over and this endeavor that is now a solid and very concrete wine business in Oregon, starting in 2012. Meanwhile, so back to Burgundy. Meanwhile, in Burgundy, it's been a very interesting moment, because of course this family domain had great holdings in Clos Vougeot, Richebourg, Von Romanée, Nuit Saint-Georges, Corton, etc. So really thrilling pieces of land. And at the same time, it was a very interesting moment for Burgundy, also transitioning from one generation to the other, realizing that perhaps the region had gone a little bit, had deviated from its course in the 60s and 70s and also the 80s, and that some reaction was needed. So there was a whole new generation that implemented it in the 90s and 2000 decade. I was part of that, so that was really a very nice moment. So there we are in a very global moment where Pinot Noir, this supposedly impossible grape to cultivate, and is now succeeding not everywhere around the world, but certainly better and better in a number of very selected parts of the world. And what is good for us in Burgundy is that there are many other places now other than Burgundy where you can grow very good Pinot Noirs, but they're all very small in general. So that is good, because of course that allows us to raise the interest for the grape variety. At the same time, it's not a direct competition. I think Oregon is now the largest Pinot Noir production outside Burgundy. I'm not so sure. In terms of region as a whole, I think the Willamette Valley is something like 70-80% perhaps of the acreage of the Côte d'Or now. So it's very close, and of course it's still growing, so it's probably going to catch up. And Sonoma and California, of course, and Napa are of course also extremely important in terms of Pinot Noir and acreage. And I remember, I'm going to say something bad about California. So sorry, but that's
We're used to getting beat up.
Yeah, I hope I can get I can be in check. I can check myself for the rest of the evening. I remember I traveled quite early, as soon as in '90, I think that was my first wine trip to America. And I remember Pinot Noir in the US back then. And I'm sure you can all give great examples of Pinot Noir of that time that you have in your cellar, I'm sure that is absolutely possible. But my memory is back in 90 that it was challenging. That Pinot Noir was a little bit of a challenge. And now, California is great. Oregon is doing what it can. I think we have good wines in Oregon too. And I think the understanding of the grape variety and of Pinot Noir has grown tremendously everywhere in the world, because in Burgundy too. So we fortunately have not stayed where we were. We've made progress, and that's great.
Well, I think that's a good segue into talking about some of these wines. But before we talk about these wines, one of the things that we talked about in putting this together and partnering up with Sinskey is the fact that when you guys made a trip to Burgundy in, was it 91?
I believe it was 91 when we visited you, visited Jean. We used to farm conventionally. In the 80s, we were farming conventionally. And we found that our soil was getting set up, that we were phylloxerated, phylloxera reoccurred. And when we discussed going organic, Jeff did a little bit of research and came back and said, what if we went, biodynamic? Have you ever heard of Rudolf Steiner and biodynamic principles? And I thought it was just crazy enough to pursue. So we literally hopped on a plane and went to France and started talking to people about biodynamics. And that's when we went over to Nicolas-Jay and visited with you guys as one of our stops, and learned a tremendous amount. But we also learned how to not be so American in our thinking. That was the big takeaway, and really understanding a connection of food and wine and elegance and finesse. And you can study other people's techniques, but you have to adapt to where you are. And so if you have I always say that we have an old world soul and a new world precision. That's the way we approach things. I completely, again, rejected the idea of making powerful wines to win competitions. We learned a lot from those trips to Burgundy, and I also remember all the girls thought you were really cute.
They still do. But I think, Rob, one of the
they work in wineries now.
Yeah.
One of the big takeaways from that trip was, as I recall in talking to you, was that the idea of what the goal was. In other words, what is the style of Pinot Noir? What are the attributes? What are the characteristics that you individually appreciated about Pinot Noir that sort of set up your goals? And I think that's kind of what's interesting about this with Nicolas-Jay, Nicolas-Jay, and Sinskey. I think all of us on this virtual tasting, if they laid out sort of 5 different bottles of Pinot from around the world that had employed various different goals, shall we say, about fruitiness, texture, terroir, etc. We all have kind of the same idea of what we think the Pinot Noir is that we would like to drink and consequently like to make. Now, how do you do that from 3 different locations? That's really what we're talking about here today, is if our goals are the same, but you are growing in Napa and Carneros primarily, we're growing Nicolas-Jay in Oregon, and Jean-Nicolas growing in Burgundy, yet the goals are the same, because certainly Jean-Nicolas could lay out 6 different bottles of Burgundy and show you very different styles in terms of Burgundy as you could in Napa. And I think one of Jean-Nicolas' point about California is that in California, you guys are more unique in the sense that that balance and that sort of equal representation of the soil and the fruit is more unique. Where in California, you tend to have, at least historically, much more that have that heavy emphasis on ripeness and fruit and more of the sort of fruit bomb. The powerful wine, I think, is the way you diplomatically stated it. So I think
Well, I would have to say, when I look at your wine and you look at ours, the difference is you look at some of the similarities. If you look at the color density, if you look at where you decided to pick where you have that beautiful red fruit and the beautiful expression. You have this, I'm not sure which cooperages you work with, but I can tell you that the oak is framed beautifully around that wine. So as wine growers and winemakers, we make these generalizations, and we have this idea. We have our benchmark wines, and Jean-Nicolas probably, I'm jealous of him because he has all of the benchmarks to choose from, whereas perhaps from California we're more limited. But I just really love the conclusions that you came to in this 2015, and I'm very thrilled to see that there's some elements of that in our wine too. And so I don't know how other people feel about that, but that's something I look for in great wine.
No, they're gorgeous, but but with Jay's point and Jean-Nicolas' point is that in the early days we didn't have a whole lot of clonal selections. We had some heirlooms that have been kicking around for a long period of time. And Pinot Noir was sort of an afterthought. For the most part, it was being put into inexpensive wines. Here it was put into sparkling wines. And so people just didn't really have a whole lot of experience working with it. And then when phylloxera hit and French clones became available, and then Parker also rose to prominence as a major wine critic, what started happening is we would take a clone that was designed for Burgundy, put it into the California sun, and you suddenly had these jammy fruit bombs. And they were high alcohol, powerful wines. And that was, to me, the antithesis of what elegant Pinot Noir was supposed to be about.
Right.
Elegant Pinot Noir was supposed to have nice acidity, subtlety, elegance, sexiness, all of the things that has made it so magical. And here we were trying to turn it into a Syrah or something else. It just didn't, it didn't make any sense. And the way we had to approach it is to reinvent the old style to a certain degree. So go back to the California heirlooms and then propagate them for our climate because they were later ripening and held onto their acidity better. So instead of embracing everything from Burgundy and trying to transplant it here, we actually had to work with what was here, what evolved here, and allow that to express itself.
Maybe you guys could talk a little bit about your actual vineyards that where these wines come from. I can put up here this map. I believe I can, at least. I'm trying to. That will show the different regions. And because one of the challenges, Rob, that you speak to is that the area that you're growing these vines in is certainly warm or warmer than it is in Burgundy, without any question. And yet your goals of terms of that balance and that feminine nature, the kind of classiness and expression that you're referring to, you're trying to achieve, that is the goal is similar to what is achieved in Burgundy. So do you want to talk a little bit about the vineyards, the location, the climate, and then how you guys manage to make such balanced wines in a region that you would argue is getting too hot?
Well, yeah. For instance, since you left it on that note of getting too hot, where I am is my Kappa vineyard. This is where my home is. And the hillside until about 3 years ago was, planted to Pinot Noir. And now we have Primitivo and Zinfandel on that hillside. So we've adapted to the realities of the place. Compared to the rest of Napa Valley, we're much cooler. I've got this beautiful little breeze going on here right now. Having to wear a little bit of a thermal because it's nice and crisp, even though the sun's out.
Sunshine. Look at that sunshine.
What you have the influence of the San Francisco Bay, the San Pablo Bay. So you have this marine layer that gets sucked in the morning. It sometimes lasts until the afternoon, tends to push over to the eastern hills and sticks along the eastern hills as it moves its way back out. In the afternoon, we tend to get wind coming through, from the Pacific. That gives us a little air conditioning effect. So we're able to maintain our acidity. The main benefit here is that until fires started becoming an issue, almost a seasonal event, there was no rush to bring in fruit. We could bring it in whenever we wanted to. Sometimes, some of our Bordeaux varieties would be out there until November. So there was never this sense of urgency that we were going to have a storm. I think in our 35 years of doing this, 89 was the only year we had significant rain during the harvest season. We've had little rainstorms here and there, little cloudbursts, but nothing major. So we have patience and time. So we have 5 vineyards in the Carneros region. So we sort of span the region from north to south, and then we have one west of us that we call the Centilla Sonoma Vineyard, so just over the county line. But all Carneros. Up Valley Pinot Noir was
differences between those vineyards, Rob?
I'm sorry?
Soil differences between those?
It's relatively similar, clay loam soils until you start moving towards our Vandal vineyard, the northern vineyards, and then it starts getting more volcanic material. So we get some red volcanic soil as you get over to the Vandal vineyard, but overall it's pretty consistent and various densities of clay-based soils, clay loam soils.
Jean-Nicolas, do you want to talk about the vineyards up in Oregon and maybe comparing those to what you heard Rob talk about, and also maybe in Burgundy? Talk about the vineyards we have up here.
Yes, our soils in Oregon seem to be quite similar to that of California. We do have a lot of red volcanic. There is also a little bit of sedimentary, but for example, in Dundee Hills, which is the AVA, which is the most common or the better known in the Willamette Valley, it's red volcanic. At Bishop Creek, it's sedimentary. So we do have a variety of soils in Oregon, relatively young soils. Whereas in Burgundy, it's totally different. It's clay and it's old soils from Jurassic. And actually, the soils in Burgundy are rather similar. There's not a lot of variation. Of course, it's different, perhaps slightly different periods, even though it's millions of years apart of the Jurassic. But it's not fundamentally different. It's just that the texture of the soils in Burgundy from one vineyard to the other would be very different. What the erosion did to these hills and to these various sites would be very different. And sometimes you have a certain type of stone, and some of the time it would be a different type of fossils. But in the base, this clay that we have and this chalk that we have are more or less the same everywhere. But the slight change of slope and of location are enough to make the wines very different. And the fact that we have a nice variety of location situations also in Oregon is, as we know, Pinot Noir is a great variety that is very sensitive to whatever you do to it, whether it's in the vineyards, in the winery, or the soil. So and I think this is the main advantage of this great variety, is that you are able to show and show very different expressions of the wines and have really interesting characters. And I was of course, coming from Burgundy and from the old world, I did not think this was possible in the new world before I did some wines in Oregon. But I was really extremely pleasantly surprised at the variety of style that you can get in Oregon and in California too. And this is a show of maturity. And it's interesting to see that these regions, whether it's California or Oregon, are really able to showcase very different styles of wine depending on the choice. And I'm very happy that you like fine Pinot Noir and not the heavily extracted and ripe Pinot Noir that we find, for my taste, too often. But the fact that actually there is a variety of style and that people are able to express themselves, even if it's at if it's not totally easy for the consumer, let's face it. It's difficult to understand.
Yeah,
but
Pinot Noir is not Pinot Noir. I mean,
yeah.
It's quite a variety.
But it's the great advantage of the grape.
Yep. Just one other thing about our vineyards, and then I'd love to move on to the wines. So we have 8 vineyards here in Oregon, one of which we own, the Bishop Creek Vineyard, which was planted in 1987. And that is organically farmed. All of the vineyards are either organically farmed, biodynamically farmed, or what they call live farmed, which is a sustainable farming initiative here in protocol here in Oregon. That is not just the vineyard; it's watershed and animal and blah 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 blah. It's important. Those 8 vineyards are spread throughout all the different AVAs that you saw on that map, and there's quite a wide variation in terms of how those grapes develop. And so we end up having usually at least 2 weeks in between our first pick and our last pick. And we've had almost 4 weeks in between the first pick and the last pick. So there is real differences in terms of the impact of the soil and the microclimates that each of these vineyards have in the various different AVAs. And the Oregonians who kind of set this all up very recently in the scheme of things, I mean, it's 20, 30, 40 years after Napa really was pretty much set up, divided it into these AVAs, kind of mimicking the French model. And there are some real characteristics to each of the AVAs in terms of climate and soil and so forth. So, and the other 7 vineyards that we don't own, those vineyards are farmed to our specifications. So we have partners that we've been with now for many years and have long-term relationships. And so all of the decisions and execution in terms of the farming is following Jean-Nicolas and Tracy, our associate winemaker, and my desires in terms of how they're farmed. So let's move on to this first wine, the Jeff, I don't know if you want to talk about this. I can share the information here. The 4, I think we wanted to talk about the 4 vineyards first. Is that right?
Sure. I'm actually tasting that with your 2015 Willamette.
Perfect.
I think I want to preface that the 2015 was the year number 4 of drought for us. So more intense. It was there was an average number of clusters for the year, but because of the limited rainfall for that season, the very small clusters. So below average in terms of what we would consider average tonnage for the vintage. So it frames a little more riper for this particular vintage. I pulled some notes on this. There were 12 individually fermented lots or blocks. There were 6 heirloom selections or clones within that, and of course from 4 vineyards. We too pick anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks from the start of harvest to the end, depending on the vintage. A vintage like 15 might have been a little more compressed. Just depends on the amount of or how the weather unfolds. I think it's probably similar for you in terms of the elongation of the harvest. Did you want to talk about the flavors? We can all chime in on that. I really thought this had a beautiful mouthfeel. I thought there was some bright cherries and stone fruit. As I said, I thought there was a little more ripeness than your 2015 tobacco, forest floor, pleasant and inviting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the idea of the 4 vineyards is to make the most elegant expression of Pinot Noir we can from the vintage. So we look at all 4 of our vineyards that have Pinot Noir planted on them on the Napa side, because again, we have one more vineyard on the Sonoma side that's not included in this cuvee. but the idea is elegance, balance, finesse, and age-worthiness. Those are the priorities of this wine. And so we'll go through every, and we'll have 32, 35 different lots of Pinot Noir in a given vintage. And we will go through and create a selection for this wine. And then if it impacts, if by making that wine, we're hurting the regular, or not the regular, but the Robert Sinskey Vineyards Los Carneros bottling, we'll blend back and make less. So we only make a few hundred cases of this wine.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very similar. And Jean-Nicolas, maybe you can talk about the 15 Willamette Valley, but this idea that you have these single vineyard bottlings, but then you also have your Carneros blend, and you're not going to sacrifice the quality of that Carneros blend. So you'll put some of the single vineyards back in. It's actually kind of similar to our what has been our Willamette Valley. You want to talk about the 15, Jean-Nicolas?
Sure. Yes, this is the way we operate in a very similar fashion, and that was, of course, something that we had to learn, because coming from Burgundy, blending for me is not. I'm not very familiar with it, and but that is a very interesting process, and at the same time, you want also to showcase your great vineyards, these great individualities that you are creating and nurturing. So it's constant balance between the two acts. And what I should say also is that in this process of blending, not everything makes it to the blend. Not necessarily everything makes it to the blend. We have, as I said, these single vineyards, but also sometimes it happens that we think that, yes, the blend would be better without a certain, not too much of a cuvée, or a certain cuvée that doesn't fit in very well. So we don't put it. And this is how we found our way, and it works. It seems to work for us. But the blend is always both a thrilling but agonizing process. Is it going to show well? I mean, all the wines, will they fit in? Will they find their place? Because otherwise, I think we are strong enough now that, and we've learned that we don't want to compromise on that. So that 15 was very interesting. It's our second vintage. In that vintage, not everything made it to the blend, as I recall, but it was a very good vintage in Oregon.
Absolutely.
Possibly great vintage in Oregon. Of course, we like all our vintages, but 15, we have really great hopes about 15. That was an extremely early vintage for Oregon, because we started on the 3rd of September. I think that was the earliest ever in Oregon, if I'm correct. Summer was very warm, very dry, extremely warm for the region. And of course, it was, as I said, only our second vintage, and I thought it normal, but everybody was saying that this is really a special conditions. But before harvest, we had a streak of overcast weather coming in. And that allowed us to finish ripening very gently, and the acids were not burned. And therefore we have a vintage which is showing a lot of strength, a lot of structure, a lot of acidity. And that was a little bit of a challenge, actually, in the aging process. And that wine went to, various phases, and it's still going on. At the beginning, we were pleased with it for the first 2 months after bottling. Then we thought that it was very hard, very closed. We're a bit worried, and it's been going generally, let's say it's been going slowly better since then. It's a vintage we really love because of this combination of acidity and ripeness, which is, of course, the best possible combination. And we think it's designed for the long term.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of this vintage and always have been. This vintage, I love this wine because of that tension, the tension between the structure and the acidity and the concentration of the fruit. The fruit, it's not a fruit forward wine by any stretch. In fact, it did, and it's true, there were times in its evolution early on where it really didn't show much fruit at all. And you really tasted the earth, but you didn't necessarily get the fruit was not showing and coming up. It would be the next morning, actually. If you went to the bottle and you had like a third of the bottle left, you'd say, wow, there's a lot of fruit in this wine. It just sure wasn't showing up last night. But as the months and years now have been moving on, this wine keeps getting better and better. And I think of all the vintages that we have, I would suggest that this Willamette Valley so far is the one that will last the longest, I would think, in terms of at least the evolution. But
we have high hopes for 18. 18 is a vintage which is a bit similar.
That hasn't been released yet. We can't really
do you feel like Pinot sort of goes through an ugly adolescent stage and then it blossoms into something beautiful later? I feel like it goes.
Yes. No, I do think so. I do think so. It's there are many exceptions to that rule, but generally I say for Burgundy, let's say for the Premier Cru and Grand Cru of Burgundy, I say 2-3 years after bottling, that's still good, but then it goes into a very a closed stage and reappears after 7-8 years of bottling. And it's difficult for me to say about Oregon. We don't have the experience yet, but this is my observation for Burgundy, and I don't know how it is with your wines in general.
And you want this, I think, with Pinot, we always joke the difference between a good Pinot and a great Pinot is about 45 minutes because it evolves so much in the glass. And if it's presenting itself everything all at one time in the glass when you first pour it, you may be a little disappointed later, whereas if it's a little closed up and evolves, by the time you get through the bottle, you're thinking, I wish I had 2 of those.
Yes, exactly. And start that process over again.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about the Three Amigos?
Let me present it first, and then I'll flip it to Jeff to talk about the flavor profile and the growing specifics. But the Three Amigos was our first vineyard. So it has a lot of sentimental value. It was originally planted all to heirlooms. When we planted the vineyard in the early '80s, you just didn't have access to the French clones. So you would taste your neighbor's wines. Once you found one you liked, you would take cuttings off of their vineyard, and that's how that vineyard was planted. It is also our coolest location. Most, it has a bit of more exposure. Arguably, the Sentia Sonoma probably has a little more, but it's the last one we pick every year, so we can, it has a slow evolution, and growing, so it gets a full development of flavor without losing the acidity, without losing its life, without losing its verve. What I love about it, it always has a cranberry tea, touch of tobacco in it, orange peel. It just has so many wonderful nuances, but it's not a wine that will blow you away on first taste. It's a wine that's very subtle at first and maybe a little too vibrant, and then it just keeps evolving and keeps opening. And I'm going to flip it to Jeff now. Jeff, are you there? Are you frozen?
No, can you hear me?
Yeah, you were just freezing up a little bit.
I'm a little unstable, it says, but I don't know how they know that, but it's true. I am.
It makes me a little nervous that they know.
So 9 lots of block. And of course from the Three Amigos, eight clones or heirloom selections. And I really like how this wine's evolving. You know, initially I poured both the wines together, the 17 and the Three Amigos, and I think it was a great choice to taste these wines side by side. Initially it's a little closed, and but then it really opens up into this beautiful red fruit, cherries. I think Rob mentioned fresh tobacco. I get forest floor and red fruits. Really nice frame of acidity, and I think someone spoke of tension. I like to use that word with Pinot. Um, you know, it's subtle but intense. You know, I know that probably sounds like opposites, but that's the way I would describe Pinot. And I just it's showing a marvelous evolution in the glass, and so I'm very happy with this 15, because initially I think because that was more of a drop vintage, it was showing a little riper early on. It was a little dumb to me, and it's certainly turned a corner.
Yeah, it's a lovely wine. It has great concentration, and I think it's interesting, Rob. The four vineyards definitely had more. You were talking about the femininity and elegance in terms in that wine, and this one has got slightly, I think, more concentration. But the other one has that lovely kind of feminine. It's interesting, very different. I mean, it's great, which is what you would expect, is that you have different characteristics showing up from two different vineyards, and or two different sets of locations in terms of that. But Jeff, you taking on the word tension, it was me that used it. It's the opposite of what I call flabby wines. And if there's anything I don't like, it's one, whether it's a white wine or a red wine, it's flabby. And tension is kind of that opposite end of things. But Jean-Nicolas, do you want to talk about Bishop Creek and our 2017 single vineyard?
Yes, Bishop Creek is the reason I came to Oregon. Actually, I didn't know at that time that I would find Bishop Creek, but when we had purchased that vineyard and tasted the wine and tasted our first wine, said, well, yeah, I made a great move, because this is a vineyard with a lot of character. This is a vineyard and wine which is sometimes not extremely accessible young, because it has a lot of tannins. Our oldest version of Bishop Creek 14 evolves beautifully, and we've tasted some older wines from that vineyard, not made by us, of course, but that were really showing very well. So this is a vineyard we have and a wine we have lots of hopes about, because of this aging capacity, even though it's a big structured wine at first. So this is a vineyard which is planted, the core of the vineyard was planted in the late 80s, which is rather old for Oregon. It's on its own roots. People thought they would not get phylloxera then. It has resisted, it's still there, showing no sign of phylloxera. We're trying to be very cautious about it. It's a vineyard we were able to purchase because it had been on the market for some time, actually. And we've met a number of people in Oregon who said, well, I visited that vineyard and decided not to purchase it. And we did, because this is a difficult vineyard by Oregon standards, and possibly by any standards. It's quite steep. It's relatively high density, not compared to Burgundy, but for Oregon for sure. It's old vines, and of course, old vines, they don't look absolutely perfect. They look, I must say, they look very nice compared to some of my vineyards here in Burgundy, but they're not young anymore, so they sometimes have a little bit of an issue now and there, and that was difficult for some people to that made it difficult for some people to purchase it. And this were, of course, exactly what we liked about it. So this is a vineyard with we found in relatively good shape, that was farmed quite well, not totally organically, but with not a lot of chemicals. It was not, the transition was not difficult to make. And yes, we've learned to tackle that vineyard and to know that you have to be patient. So that 17 vintage is one of the softest, easygoing vintages that we've made, possibly the softest.
Yeah, of our vintages so far, it's the only vintage that, especially Bishop Creek, which tends to be, it is the beefiest kind of strongest structure and so forth of all of our vineyards. And it tends to be the one the most closed and the most least approachable upon release. And even in 17, even the Bishop Creek, you can actually approach out of the gate, where in 15, 16, you know, not so much.
I mean, we make it sound like it's an undrinkable wine when it's young. It's not the case, actually. But if you're used to tasting Pinot Noir, you can really feel in that wine the potential, and you feel that, oh, all right, this is going to be great. I simply have to wait for a few years, because now it's not undrinkable. Yes, I can drink it, but I feel. The most I feel is the power, and the fact that it's a big wine, but the complexity is not there yet. It needs time to come in, and there is a natural concentration. There is a natural amount of tannin and power in that wine that makes it better to save it for the long term. But in 17, it is approachable. It is approachable. That's what these vintages are made for.
Do you guys, Rob or Jeff, any comments on the Bishop Creek? Anything you want to talk about with that wine?
Yummy.
I happen to love wines like this. You know, they're restrained when they're young. You know, everyone gives Bonnemar 10 years, right? Before, oh, you must wait 10 years. So we're all young men. Time's on our side.
Exactly.
And so
I put it better myself.
And once again, how that wine evolves in the glass is going to reward you throughout the meal. And I'm guessing that you'll finish that bottle and want another one. I wouldn't know how or why you wouldn't.
One just last thing on Bishop Creek, and then I want to move on. We promised to everybody an hour here, so I'm trying to manage that. The interesting thing for me always about Bishop Creek is that we discovered that vineyard in the glass. And what I mean by that is when Jean-Nicolas and I spent 2012 and 13 visiting, you know, various different cellars and vineyards and tasting literally hundreds of wines from various different vineyards, this was a vineyard that I did not previously know about. I don't think you did either, Jean-Nicolas. And we went into a cellar and we walked out as we did, and we had tasted, you know, 8 different vineyards and things. And we went, what was that Bishop Creek? And we both had the same kind of, wow, that was interesting. And we then chased it up and were initially told that there was no wine available for us. And then we learned that as Jean-Nicolas says, it was for sale. It had been off and on for sale for a period of time. And so I think when it's one thing when you buy a vineyard or because someone, it's like buying a house, right? Oh, well, hey, that house is for sale. Well, that's very different than discovering it through taste and then learning that it's for sale, which I think is always the most important part of the Bishop Creek story. So all of you received in your packages, I believe, or there's also a link to a couple of recipes, or a recipe, if I'm not mistaken. Rob, do you remember exactly what it was that we had put out? And I thought we should give Maria a little chops here. We can't just, you know.
All right, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get into the presentation full of the gougères. Phil is on it. Thank you, Phil. And the pinwheels. Okay, all right, thank you. I'm glad I've got a brain out there somewhere to help me along. But the gougère is classic. classic Burgundian fare. I know we were all impressed when we were young, and because we would visit the cellars in Burgundy in January, and because that's the time everything's slow here, and it was the kind of time of year where it was just nice to warm up by going into the cellar, because it was so cold out, and always the vigneron's wife would come in with a basket of chanterelle mushroom rillettes too, with a basket of gougere, and it blew me away. It blew me away, just the flavor of these fresh, warm out of the oven, cheese puffs. And then when I met Maria, one of the reasons I married her was because after about a month of dating.
Careful. Be very careful here.
After about a month of dating, my birthday was coming up, and she bought me a case of Futures of a Hospice de Beaune Burgundy that was being elevated by Nicolas-Jay. And I said, well, if she knows me this well, if she knew that this was the perfect gift for me, that this is the woman I should probably marry. And
that was a very strong card by Maria there.
And it's been a fairy tale ever since.
All right. Oh yeah. But one of the most challenging things in the world is to have a relationship with a chef, because they do not lack in opinion. That is one thing. But she ran 3 restaurants when I met her. She was a Relais and Chateau chef, one of the few female Relais and Chateau chefs. And she had studied pastry in Denmark and worked for all the great French chefs, doing most of her time with I'm blanking on his name, of course, right now, from Au Crocodile in Strasbourg.
And not even Westerman.
No.
Wester.
Oh, Westerman is in Europe, isn't he?
He was in Strasbourg.
In Strasbourg, it was. I can't believe I'm having a singing moment. It'll come to me afterwards. But anyway, she has an amazing palate. She is one of those, what would be considered a super taster.
But I think, Rob, the interesting thing that sorry to interrupt you, but what is really interesting is that since the very beginning, and Maria has expanded upon this, but part of the whole essence of Sinskey was food and wine. I mean, you had a chef on staff. You had Greg Cole there at the beginning.
Yep.
You had Andrew, who now is up here,
right,
a wine shop.
Andrew Turner, right?
Andrew Turner, fantastic, and then of course Maria. And I'm sitting in our new tasting room, which is basically just finished, and I think you can see behind me that kitchen.
There we go.
Commercial kitchen here in there, which food is going to be is a very important part of what we're doing at Nicolas-Jay. And I think that's what's sort of really interesting and kind of makes both your winery and us a little bit more unique in that sense.
Right. Well, to me, it never made sense to just serve wine with crackers and and nothing else. I feel when you're tasting wine without food, you really can't understand wine. Unless you're trained anyway, because the acids become too. The acid stands out when you're not eating food with it, and also, one of my secret desires before I went to art school was to go to culinary school. And my family did an intervention, and so I ended up giving them the middle finger and going to art school instead. But when Greg started with us, Greg started off as when Jeff took over as winemaker. Greg came in as our cellar master, but he was also a trained chef, and so he would put card tables out in the tasting room and cook on little portable propane burners for every customer that came through. And eventually we built a kitchen with a wood oven and all that. And then 20 years later, I finally fulfilled my promise to Maria by putting in a full commercial kitchen. But again, to us, it was all about the food. It was all about the experience. And to me, it was more of a badge of honor when someone like Thomas Keller or Charlie Trotter or someone like that would want us to sell them a barrel of wine. We used to create wine for Charlie Trotter's auction at his charity program. And to me, that was much more important than any endorsement from a wine critic.
Yeah, no, it's a great part of the culture and a great part of the story. We are over our hour. We did have one question that someone had asked, which I think I'm going to let you answer, Jeff. It was, what did I, and because you can answer for me, is what did I mean by a flabby wine? Because you nodded your head about.
Oh, that was a question by Jeffrey Coe. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. Well, I mean, I think that term flabby means different things to different people, but for me, there's little or no tension that we discussed. The acidity and the tannin is not really there. It's almost presents itself as a sweetness through the mid palate. And though you may have a long finish, it doesn't offer a lot of substance throughout a meal. And so I describe something of something that's very low acidity, maybe very high in alcohol, and could be very densely colored as well, but just sort of falling apart. You know, when you initially pour it, it's beautiful, but it probably doesn't hold together till the end of the meal.
Yeah, to me, it's lack of definition. I mean, it's lack of there's no conviction in that wine about what it is. It's kind of just, it's kind of that. Yeah.
Well, every chef, one of the most important ingredients is acid. And that's where, because, I know in the New World, most people are trained in an early age to enjoy sugar. We all grew up on sodas and juices and such, and we really, don't have a tolerance for acidity. And once you, once you enter fats from animal or olive oil or whatever, that acid really makes that explosion happen in your mouth, where all the flavors truly fill your mouth. I saw something flash on the screen about pH.
Yeah, someone was asking if the pH is too high, would that be appropriate would that indicate flab?
Absolutely. I wasn't going to mention pH because sometimes people say don't go there with the chemistry, but yes, higher pH wines will certainly show more flabby. Absolutely. Which is why, and Pinot has a tendency to go to the higher pH spectrum. Now, I love to see finished wines at around 3.4, 3.5 if you're going to talk about pH, and have acidity between 5.8 and 6.3. Now, in Burgundy, those numbers are easier to achieve than they are in California and Oregon, has been my observation.
Yes, that's true.
2000, what year was it, Jean-Nicolas, that we had lower was it 19?
No, it's true in general. I mean, I usually say that it's in Burgundy, ripeness is an issue, and in Oregon, acidity is an issue. This has not been the case in both regions in the past few years. We've had very extremely warm and ripe years in Burgundy, and we've had some solid and high acidity wines in Oregon, especially in 18 and 19. Yeah. I think 19 is the year where pHs are lower in Oregon than they are in Burgundy. But yes, so things are a bit changing, but it remains true that, and sometimes our ripeness is still a little low, a little bit more difficult or challenging to achieve. But yes, flabbiness is lack of acidity, lack of tension. It tastes like maple syrup, and on top of that, it's not concentrated. So you don't even have the texture. So
Never
that's,
good when Jean.
that's a nightmare. That's a nightmare. Flabby is a nightmare.
Never good. All right.
Agreed.
Well, thank you, Jeff and Rob, for getting and spending part of your Saturday with Jean-Nicolas and I.
Thank you.
Big fans of your wine, and equally important, big fans of you guys as people. And it's a pleasure to see your mugs here. And thank you, Jean-Nicolas, for staying up late after dinner over there in Von Romane. If any of you are interested, I know many of you bought some of the 2-packs of getting aspects of one or the other wines, but certainly reach out to either winery, whichever it is. I believe all of these wines are still available. I don't think we sent you anything that we're sold out of. And I assume that's the case for you guys at Sinskey. Hopefully we didn't do that. So certainly let us know if you'd like more. And if there's any other questions or things that you would like, then certainly reach out to us. But thank you for participating, and have a great weekend. And any
Thank you, everyone.
Great.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. Thank you, Jean-Nicolas. Thank you, Mr. Vernig.
Hey, good to see you all. Jay, I'll see you next time you're in Yountville, yes?
Absolutely. We will definitely do that. We'll drink some wine.
And bring your wine crafter with you.
Yeah, I'll try to get them over here. Right at the moment, it's a little tough getting them in from France, but we'll work on that.
These are the challenges.
Exactly.
Cheers to you all.
Thanks very much.
Right. Take care.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.